If you want to start or scale your property development business to 8 figures and beyond, then you're in the right place. This is the Property XPerts Podcast with Ben Richards and Jack Jiggens, two serial entrepreneurs bringing weekly insights from our award-winning businesses. In these podcasts, you'll learn how we found, funded and delivered over £80 million worth of property in the last 6 years, with templates you can use, deal analysis and deep dive discussions that will help you build your businesses successfully. We hope you'll enjoy.
Happy Friday evening, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. You will notice that it's just myself for this moment in time, but we do have a special guest on today. It's going to be a special guest and also a special episode today because Ben is in Mauritius, tanning himself up with the family. And I'm here in England, but it's sunny, so positive news. If you haven't joined us before, we're serial entrepreneurs and we like to share the highs and lows in business. And today's episode is a specific Ask Me Anything questionnaire. So if whatever platform you're on, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, you can ask live questions and I will be answering all of them today. So make sure you get the questions in. See if you can ask me a question I can't answer. And you can ask questions about anything, whether it's business, personal, diary management, how to get out of your 9 to 5, whatever it may be. Ask me questions because today is specifically around questions. I've already had a few questions in just from my stories today, so I've got some prepared, and that's where the special guest comes in to help. But please fire the questions in because the more we get, the better we can go through them and hopefully give you guys some more value. So without further ado, I'll start going through what we're up to today. So if you're new to the channel, we run a group of businesses, a development company, a surveying company. Ben runs his own architectural practice. I run a lettings and HMO management business. But across the board, we've got quite a good handle on service-based businesses and property-related businesses specifically, which we've been growing and scaling in the UK for the last decade. Today, the agenda is pretty straightforward. It's just asking me questions. And if you're a podcast listener, it's the 16th of May, 2025, obviously. And the first question that I had on my Instagram here, as you can see, is my adorable wife pulling me up on a spelling error, which I didn't even notice because I was typing it all out too quickly. I think I spelled episode, espisode. So there you go. Great start to the session. So, I mean, let's get straight into it. But just before we do, I'm going to introduce you to Tom, who is a member of XP Property. He's a project manager that's been working with us for well over 2 years now, Tom, isn't it?
Yeah, coming up on 3 now.
There we go. Seasoned professional XP. Do you want to give all of our audience just a bit of a summary, a short sort of 10 seconds on your background and then what you do in the business?
Yeah, sure. So originally graduated from Nottingham Trent with a degree in building surveying. A couple of years after that, working consultancy side, mostly doing sort of commercial and industrial work, and a lot of, obviously, as building surveyors, of professional consultancy work. Got chartered with the RSES in, I think it was 2021 now, a while back, and shortly after that decided I wanted to make the jump across to the development side of things, and the stars aligned, and not long after that met you guys.
Join the dark side.
I did join the dark side.
There we go. Very good. So Tom's going to be helping with, we've had a couple of questions that have come in off the back of announcing that we're going to be doing the Q&A. So Tom's going to be helping me with a few of the more technical ones, which I'm sure I could answer, but Tom will give you a better answer. So diving straight into Andrew Terry, 1902. I hope that's not your date of birth, because otherwise we owe you a congratulations for being, 113 years old. But the question is, hi, Jack, listen to your appearance on the Property Founder podcast, which was with Michael Dean, who's the founder of Avamore Capital. We were on his podcast the other day. He mentioned that we were securing fixed price contracts for developments, saying you might do three or six. So I think that's 3 or 6 projects and 3 or 6 contracts, and that you carry out your own due diligence and contractors beforehand. I found that really interesting and was wondering your due diligence process is with finding and evaluating contractors, and then basically how do you go and vet them for the right project. And this is a really good one for Tom, because Tom actually implemented a very good process to pre-qualify our contractors.
Yeah, so firstly, you need to find the contractors in the first place, and the best way of doing that is recommendations, particularly from investors, developers at a similar sort of level to you, so you know that their contractors have experience delivering the sort of projects that you're working on. But also, just posting on sort of LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever else, to get recommendations, and then, networking events, that kind of thing. Once you've got a list of contractors that you want to go out to, we've got a pre-qualification questionnaire, which is pretty extensive. So you send that out to all of the contractors who have expressed an interest in tendering for the project. And that includes all sorts of things like their insurance coverage, their experience in similar sort of projects, references potentially, all that kind of stuff. So once we have all of those back, we'll review all of the responses they've given, and with those narrow it down to which contractors we actually want to go out to tender with.
Very good. So what you're referring to is our PQQ pre-qualification questionnaire, which is quite a tongue twister, isn't it? But as Tom said, I've actually got it up in front of me. So we actually asked for example projects, who the client was, what the project details were, location, architect, structural engineer, project value, interior design, program, etc. We asked for their financials, so the last 3 years, company turnover, then group annual turnover, what turnover they do in residential, what potential turnover they do in commercial, and then what that anticipated turnover is a big one, because you obviously don't want a contractor taking on so much work that they can't actually scale up to the capabilities to deliver your site. Their insurances, the management capabilities, and the people that are in charge of the business, really. And then, yeah, I suppose what's this? I like this one. What steps has your company taken in the last 12 months to improve health and safety, construction quality, reduce construction costs? So it's an extremely detailed Q&A that Tom sends out to contractors in the tender process. And actually, I think we had a few contractors before that just said, I'm not filling that out. And you can kind of tell how excited they are on taking on your work, if that is the case.
Yeah. I was going to add to that. You do sometimes use that because there's so much detail in it. You don't necessarily, especially depending on the size of the project, you don't necessarily expect all contractors to fill out every section, because even some of it we're not really that interested in. But you can also use it to whittle down some of the contractors that aren't that enthusiastic, because if they have sort of expressed an interest in doing the project, but then once they realize they actually have to put a bit of work in before even going to tender, and they're not that bothered, you kind of think, well, if they're not interested in, if we usually will send these to contractors we haven't worked with before rather than ones we have. So if they're not that interested in, one, winning this project, or two, building a relationship with us for potential future work, then how enthusiastic are they going to be about the project once they've got it?
Yeah, completely agree. Very good. So this is a pre-questioned question, but we have actually got a question in since we launched. So just a reminder for everyone tuning in now, ask questions live. This is what this session is all about. But we've got a question that's just come in, and I'm going to actually answer that now before we move on to the next one, because it's very relative to this existing question. So thank you, James, for the question. And it's, when you're converting a house to a HMO, how do you usually go about vetting the build team? Do you always use a JCT contract? If so, how do you typically structure the payments, in stages, milestones, or something else? Any lessons learned over the years managing that side of things? So I'll give an answer to this, and then Tom can probably follow up with certainly something a little bit more professional. So our HMO contracts are typically between the value of, we've had them as cheap as 40k all the way up to about 220k. We kind of find the cusp of actually requiring a full JCT signed contract about 150 as a build contract upwards. We find something of a smaller sum is probably better just to do an informal contract between you and the contractor. Those contractors don't tend to have an office and an office manager and someone in compliance and someone doing all that. Is typically your son, your dad and sons, or it's a small build outfit, or it's a one-man band that's bringing in trades. But where you do have to ensure that you have obviously the right paperwork in place is ensure that they're principal contractor for the building regulations process. So for me, it's actually less protection for me, but more protection for the building control. We've done all of our HMOs outside of a JCT contract because the contract value is not large enough. And also the contractors that we do our HMOs with, it's kind of repeat business. So we've already built a relationship with them by the time we might even do a bigger project with them. So typically we have I would call an informal direct contractual agreement with them. We obviously have a scope of works. They obviously tender out and produce a price. And then we do 100% draw down the funds in milestones. Depending on the contractor, some like to pay weekly, some fortnightly, some monthly. But what I would make sure that you do is two really important things. One, well, actually three. One, make sure there's a retention in the whole facility all the way through the project so that they don't get to a point where they've made their money already and they're less interested to finish off your scheme. Two, make sure that the works that you're paying for is done with your retention reduced, because obviously you can't get works done if you've already paid for it. It's very difficult to motivate someone to do something they've already been paid for. And then point number three, make sure it falls in tangent with your drawdown facility with your bank lender, which is actually the next question, and we'll come on to that probably in a little bit more detail from a development perspective. But then, like my three main top tips with working with a contractor on HMOs. Tom, do you want to add anything more to that?
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it there. I think as a chartered surveyor, I should probably never be advising anyone not to bother with a contract. But I think in the reality of things, like you said, it's sort of a balance of cost and risk. And if it's particularly a contractor that you've worked with very closely on numerous projects before, it's not high risk. You know that they'll come back and sort out issues for you. Then you just go ahead with sort of a written agreement rather than a full contract, which I think you guys probably do a lot more in central suites. But in XPP and the size of projects we have, it's all very much JCT intermediate works. All of our projects at the moment have been JCT intermediate building contracts with contractor's design portion. So you're kind of subbing out some of the design risk to the contractor for things like the M&E design, fire stopping, those kind of things that sort of involve a lot of design work, which can often be updated as you go along. And things like fire stopping, who really wants to be drawing a plan showing exactly where all the fire bats and collars and everything have to go when the contractor should really know how they need to be doing that on site. What was the next bit? How do you structure payments? I think you said milestones, but we do use stages, so it's a monthly.
Let's hold that question actually for now. So thank you, James. We are going to answer the next bit in a second. I'm going to go on to the next question, which I hope is this one, which says, "I have a question, comma, please." This is actually from the This is actually from the Nutbrook Boys. So thanks for the question. When mapping out construction cash flow for a development, how much detail do you go into weekly versus monthly, and how far in advance do you map things out? That's a question for Tom. And then what is your approach to balancing enough funds to hand to make sure that your works can continue smoothly, paying for materials, etc., vice versa, much having a flow, paying too much interest on that? So I could probably help out with that second point. So Tom, far away.
Yeah, I think I could probably do a bit on that second one as well. But for the first one initially, it kind of depends on how you're managing your contract. So if, again, you have sort of the JCT, you've got monthly payments, there's not really much benefit to going into all the detail of forecasting weekly, if not from my perspective anyway. So you just want to understand how much your outgoings are each month. If you're individually managing all of the trades yourself, and maybe you're paying them on a day basis and you pay them each week, then clearly you're going to want to understand the weekly outgoings, and how much is going to be going out to them each week. What was the next bit I had? In terms of forecasting it, it's a bit of a sort of a rough job at the start when you're working to your budget and your estimated program. So you really just want to sort of give a rough impression of how much you're going to be spending each month, or how much you expect the contractor to be billing each month. But then once you sort of agreed the contract sum, you've got your pricing document, you've agreed a program with the contractor, you can then, with their help probably, go into a lot more detail, expecting how much they're going to be claiming in each month, and therefore how much you're going to need to be paying them. If they're a bigger outfit, then they'll probably be providing you with sort of a Gantt chart showing exactly what work they expect to be doing each week, and based on the sums in your pricing document, you should be able to sort of allocate that approximately.
Just realised I was on mute. So from an acquisition, just from an acquisitions perspective, to try and cash flow that yourself, because obviously even before you've even got into tender and contract value and working out a cash flow, even the Gantt chart with the contractor, you've got to work out, one, how much money you need to do the deal, two, where that comes from, whether it's you, your investor, or something else. And then you've got to cash flow that piece, because actually the first phase typically of build is normally lent on you bringing in the surplus cash to deliver the site. So we have quite a simple metric that we use to do that. And I would like to think that as a very, very harsh rule of thumb, we normally estimate the deposit on the purchase, which is between sort of 30 to 40% of the purchase price. You will then need all of the purchase costs. We call these dead costs. So stamp duty, acquisitions fees, legal fees, valuation fees, all of those costs that you're not going to get back. And they're typically not drawable from the bank. The bank don't like funding things that are dead costs, transactional costs. You will then have to fund pre-planning, planning, and detailed design in cash. And we budget for that. And then you would also have to cater for at least 5% of the construction in cash as well. So all of that budget sits on top of your bank facility, because you need that first phase of funding to then draw down in arrears with your monitoring surveyor with the bank. So it's almost like a bit of a float. One thing that I would say is, when I say a minimum of 5%, the larger the project, the smaller that coverage can be. And the reason I mention that is because on an HMO, if we're spending 150K in construction fees, I don't want to draw 5% at a time. You'll end up spending more money on the monitoring surveyor than you will in the cost of finance. But with a larger scheme, if your build is, let's say, 2 million quid, you might be comfortable drawing 100 to 200 grand at a time, because you can do quite a lot of work with that amount of budget, and actually spending $1,000 per drawdown isn't the end of the world. It's not going to break that particular deal. So that's our rough cash flow pre-tender and pre-contracts being signed with the contractor. What we then do is, so we take the deposit amount, which we've estimated, we take the purchase cost amount, we take the design and planning, we take then the percentage of the construction. What we then do is, when we've gone to a debt lender, we then work out the exact amount, because we might be able to, and I know asking from this question from the boys, you sometimes have to balance borrowing too much for your investor and reducing their indefinite rate of return on their cash. Because if they're putting in more cash for the same return, then their cash on cash return is worse. So there is a balance of not borrowing too much, but borrowing enough so that you can get from A to B. So equally, to keep that down, once you get terms on your table from a lender, you can then actually work it out to the pound within reason of the cash you actually need from your investor. Always add a buffer. We always end up having to, the problem we have with a lot of our sites is we phase them. So if we phase them by phase one, then phase two, phase one is going to be very different to phase two. And actually, we normally need more cash to go into phase two. It's not the end of the world, because we've added value by the phasing process, but we often then have to go back and recapitalize and then carry on the phase two.
Sorry, I cut out for a second there. Did you move on to the second part of the question there? Or are we still on one?
Yeah, I've moved on to the second part.
Oh no, nightmare! I had more to say on the first part.
There you go.
Go back to it, or should we wait until?
I think we're pretty much done on this one now.
Moving on.
Yeah,
okay,
we're pretty much done. I don't know if there's any other construction ones, Tom. So if you do want to, you can go and enjoy the sun and
go find a beer garden somewhere.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, thank you for coming on.
That's right. We'll make it a permanent section. I'll do Tom's tips every week.
Tom's tips, nice. Thanks very much, Tom. See you later. Have a good weekend.
That's right. Take care. You too. Bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye. So, moving on to the next question is, hi, Jack. Can you tell me how you create value through paper shuffling? This is from Jordan. And I believe what Jordan is referring to is essentially contractual work with essentially sites. So the way that you can do that through paper shuffling, it could be also known as subselling or back-to-backs. You could equally find an acquisition or a contract and sell it on to someone else. I've seen it before where People pre-let a building and then either sell it on before they've even owned it, or alternatively have bought it then themselves. We've actually done that. So a vacant building, approach the market to let it out, get an interested tenant. It's currently a vacant building with vacant possession and vacant valuation. And then you go get a tenant interested to pay £25 a square foot on a 10-year lease, and then you commit to buy it. So that's a paperwork exercise pre-purchase. You could also sell that on. And that is what I believe Jordan means. Jordan, if you'd like, let me know if that has answered it, or if you mean something else from a value creation from paper shuffling. Paper shuffling is a phrase that's coined so that you're not actually building or developing or breaking a sweat in the construction or even planning world. But there is quite often opportunities from that. To give you an example, you might have heard of companies that are, like, for an example, Purple Bricks. Purple Bricks was bought for £1, and that was a paperwork exercise. Obviously, there was liabilities bought there, but there was probably exposure and a game plan to turn that business around. Again, a paperwork exercise. Now, this is a really good question, quite a technical question. I'm going to try and get my head out of the way. There we go. So this was from Karen. Thank you very much for the question. Thanks, Jack. A newbie question. Apologies. Structuring a deal. Two partners, myself and a trusted contractor. Hypotheses, purchase costs and soft costs, which I'm guessing is professional fees, stamp duty, legals, etc., is funded by the developer in this instance, and the build costs is funded by the contractor. The developer's putting in 500k, the contractor's putting in 300k, and then it's basically, please can you run through how a profit split is split in this particular structure? Do I charge a project for my architectural services, brackets, soft costs, or is it wiser to structure that as my contribution? Really good question. And actually, we get asked this a lot, and we do JVs with contractors. It's quite a complicated way that we structure things, and I'll tell you how we do it. I find that the best way a contractor or professional can JV just merely on their services, not capital, just on their services. So architect's going to charge 20 grand. You go through a project and you say, look, if we get the planning, I'll give you 35. If we don't, that was part of your JV, for an example. That is quite a typical way where it's a fee-driven amount and it's got not relevance to the project or the profit. But the way that we do things with contractors is profit-driven. So to go through this in detail, and it is going to be a little bit complicated, but I'll try and keep you guys with me. We typically do half of the deal goes to the developer for finding the site, delivering it, facilitating it, managing it, doing whatever it takes to get that deal over the line, raising debt, whatever it may be. The other half of the project goes to the money. So it's a 50-50 split between the developer and the money. You'll notice that the contractor is yet to be brought into this unless the contractor is the money. So what we do in this particular scenario, let's just assume we've got this house development. The total investment required is £800,000. The developer is the developer that we know in this, which is Karen. I'm guessing she's found the deal. I would also suggest that whatever is charged, if Karen found it, there's an acquisition fee. If the Karen's doing the architectural fee, she gets paid out of that, or there's at least an allocation of cost for that. The contractor is delivering the works and they get paid for that and their profit. And then what you end up with is a rounded deal with no favors. So there's been no favors. Everyone's been paid on the nose for the services that they've done. And then whatever profit is left is split half to the developer and half to the money. So in this particular scenario, the developer is putting in 500,000, and the developer, in my opinion, should also have the 50% profit for the finding and the delivery. So the developer's already got 50% of the profit, and they've also put in the 500k of the 800k that's required. So that would then split. So if the contractor does all the construction works, gets paid the profit for the construction works, so they're a paid contractor, but they've also invested 300,000 into the joint venture. What they've actually invested is 37% of the capital. So if you divide that then by 2, it's 18% of the net profit would go to the 18.7% would go to the contractor. But bearing in mind they've already made their construction profit, so they've made a construction profit, and their money has accrued 18.7% return out of the net profit. And then the developer has 50% for delivery, and then also the remaining amount on top of that, which is 63% of the investment side. So if you halve that again, it's 31.5 plus 18.7 is how you get to your 50%. So we have two pots, developer pot and an investor pot. And in this particular instance, the developer is also the investor and the contractor is the investor. And that is exactly how we structure things. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to give you another hypothesis, which is how we do it. And I want you to assume we found a flip. We're flipping a house. It's 300k purchase and it's 600k gross development value. The contractor is going to get paid £100,000, which includes their profit to deliver it, but they're going to put in all the money to invest. So let's say we're leveraging it with bank finance. We need about 200k. And the profit is about 200k. The way that we would structure that is because we found it, got it funded with bank finance, get it delivered, get through planning, manage the contractor, help the contractor, finish the scheme and sell it. We would have half that profit. So 100 grand would go to us as a developer. And then the investor puts in all the money. So they get the 100 grand that is the investment side of the pot, but they've also got paid their profit on their contracts. That is how we do it. The main reason we do it that way is because if you do, if I have a contractor that builds out at cost, you can't actually then benefit the drawdown process with a bank. So I would rather the cash up front from the contractor and pay them the profit, because then you can draw down 100% of their build facility throughout the project. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, ask me again and I can actually do a screen-on-screen presentation. But my advice to you is split it up into two, 50% for the developer, 50% for the investor, and that could be either of you or anyone. And then I would recommend you charge fees for all your services. The builder charges their build fees and you charge for your architectural fees. Cool. If you would like any mentoring or like to have a one-to-one, I had one with 3 guys in a business today, which I massively enjoyed. It was the first session, so we covered huge ground and I gave them so much homework. But Ben and I do one-to-ones if you would like to join and receive a one-to-one or excel your business or take you to the next stage or even break the ground on running a property business, do reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Cool. Question from one architect to another. So thank you very much for the question. I will be coming on to the questions coming in live. We've got them all coming in. So I'm going to try and rattle through these because we're almost halfway through. So question is, have you done any ground up developments, residential, mixed use or commercial? I've most recently seen your work on existing buildings and conversions. Really good question. So our competitive advantage as a company, because we're not a contract developer, we're not a construction company and a development company, is we have to instruct, as we've already just said on this call, fixed price contracts with which are JCT with contractors. So our competitive advantage is not build costs. We typically build out a little bit more expensive than others, and we create value in the acquisitions and the design process. So that, for that reason, we're much better buying disused existing buildings at £100 a square foot rather than trying to build stuff at £275, £300 a square foot. The stock we're buying is typically cheaper than we'd actually be able to build it, which I call replacement value. So we have a bit of a niche on repurposing those existing buildings. If land sites come up and we can make them stack, which is typically if we've got them very early on pre-planning or maybe a huge enhancements in planning, then definitely we would look at new build. So we're not discounting new build sites. We would definitely do them. I actually like new build. I've got a few in my sort of prehistoric career before we met Ben. Ben's done a bit of new build himself. In the early days, we did a few new build units, and I actually believe new build houses sell a lot better than flats. So the sales risk is lower. But it's just the way that our business model is best competitive in the market space. Buying existing buildings and repurposing them means that our value creation is really good. So hopefully that answers it, and we'll go on to the next one. A question related to business relationships. This is Karen as well. Thank you very much for the question. I actually love this one. How do you manage mistakes? If either you or Ben make business mistakes which had a financial implications, how do you manage the situation? I was actually talking to someone about this the other day, and yeah, it's really important. So I believe that finding a successful partnership is a lot harder than being successful yourself. And I find that it's a very, very difficult space to make it work. And that's off the back of having a partnership that I was in before where it didn't really work. And now working with Ben, it definitely feels like 1 + 1 = 3. We have very good sort of automative work. We get on really well and we vibe really well. We like growing together. We've definitely got very alike morals and work ethic and goals. And that's been very aligned since day one. And part of that, Karen, when Ben gets something wrong or I get something wrong, and this does happen, and you do make mistakes, we're humans. And in actual fact, in our business, we like to think that a mistake is only a mistake if it's made twice. But I've made mistakes and Ben's made mistakes. And the beauty of our partnership, I believe, is whatever's happened, we move on, we move forward, we learn. Tom actually integrated a risk register and a thing where we reflect back on schemes and see what mistakes we've made, as I think it's called a learning log or something like that, which is really great. But the best thing about it is I've been in meetings before where I've made a mistake and we're with a third party or an external contractor, consultant, professional, and Ben will always have my back, and that is vice versa as well. So it doesn't really matter what the mistake is, we will wear it. We're a company, we're a collective, we're a team. And that is more important than the actual mistake itself. So, Karen, to answer your question, Ben backs my mistakes and I back his. It is what it is. We move on, we learn. We'll all make mistakes. And that's really important to sort of carry that ethos in the business. We also, if we completely loggerheads and disagree with something pre-making a decision, so we'll sometimes have a decision on our hands and we might have different views on what it should be as a result. We will often put a small wager on it. So I'll go, cool. If you think that's the right answer, you go for that. But if you're wrong, I'll put a tenner on it. And it kind of making it a bit fun and in jest in a healthy relationship does make it quite fun because you're accepting that it could be wrong. And you're saying, if it is wrong, I get one tenner over you and we, shake hands and move on. So it's a really good question. And I would say it's a really interesting question to focus on when it comes to partnerships. And partnerships aren't easy. So I feel like I've been super lucky finding Ben as a partner, and so long may it continue. Cool. If you are listening to us now, please go and rate us. It only take you a couple of clicks to give us a bit of a rating, and it really does help and enable us to give you better content and episodes and ideas. And the more followings and feedback we get, the better. And I'm actually loving at seeing how many questions are coming in here. So I'm really going to have to speed up so that I can get around to everyone's. This is a bit of a joke one. Thanks, Andrew. Question was, if a remake of Top Gun, the original, was made, would you consider the role of Iceman? Me and my wife are huge Top Gun fans, especially the opening sequence with, what's that song? Danger Zone. I thought about seeing if I get it to play it, but an absolute tune there. Cool. Lewis Nichols got a few questions. So question is, how important do you think it is to have a business coach and a mentor? Absolutely imperatively important as a business owner. I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. We, at any given time, probably have 1 or 2 business coaches and non-exec advisors. They could be paid. They could be relatives that have done really well in business. They could be people that really enjoy watching your journey. But I definitely recommend. And often people say to me, how much should you spend on that type of thing? And I really think it should be a percentage really of your sort of growth and turnover. So for an example, if you've got a business that's turning over £100,000, you're probably not doing the right thing getting a non-exec advisor at £2,000 plus VAT per month, which will equate to about 15 to 20 grand. That might be all of your profit margin. But what I would really recommend you do is think within your network, within your family, friends, who is successful and who might be able to give you that preliminary advice for free. I've got mentors who are friends. I've got mentors who are relatives, and they don't charge you for that. You just sort of pick their brains as you see them, or you might say, let's grab a beer. I've got something I want to ask you and get your opinion on. Definitely do it with friends. That's really important if you've got friends that are business owners. Dorian, a good friend of mine, he doesn't have a business partner. He'll always call me up and be like, I'm just about to make a decision. What do you think of this? And put it to me and ask for my opinion too. So definitely get it in. And then obviously as a relative amount of income, if you're then doing £100 million turnover business and you are paying someone 50 grand a year to mentor you, that's probably a relative amount for you and the growth of your business. One thing I'd mention to look for in terms of mentors when you get going, maybe someone with big, good commercial nous and understanding of business and life. But then as you start to maybe employ someone or pay someone to do that thing, look at people that have been where you want to be, done it and completed it and taken the next step further. Next question for part 2 with Lou is, how often should you engage them? As soon as you can, mate. I would engage a non-exec or a business coach as soon as possible. XP Surveys had a business coach the week it was born, and that is really important. You've got to afford that because it will pay dividends in the long run. Another question from Lewis: do you issue monthly commercial reports to investors on each project? Yeah, on the larger projects we do. In central suites, in our HMO and renovation projects, we typically just send photos. That might even be a photo from a contractor that would then just forward on WhatsApp. When it comes to the larger projects, which is the obviously the developments that we have in XP Property, 100% we do typically a one-pager, which is almost like a risk register, analyzes the cost, timeframes, budgets, planning updates, processes, any details or nuances that have changed since the monthly report, and then we also go through the financials as well as site progress photos and the market condition. We have actually been testing doing like live and videos to our investors of late, but we definitely do that. Lou, if you would like that template, just maybe comment or DM me investor progress update, and I can get that over to you. Cool. So I think we're now on to the live asked questions. So I'm going to start at the beginning. So if you've been with us, if you are still tuned in, this is a live Q&A. Any question answered. See if you can ask me a question I can't answer. Ask me anything, whether it's business, property, HMO, projects, whatever it may be, and I will try my best to give you the best answer possible. I might actually go, what happens if I go like this and then go like this? Can we see that? Yep, cool. So question from Alfie Croft. Do you standardize spec on everything? Same color, same flooring, same tiles, etc., or come up with each scheme and site? So all of our sites are different. All of our buyers are different. All of our developments have a very different, I suppose, finish. And for those reasons, we build in different interior design palettes and packages. And for that reason, they're all different. If this is a question about our HMOs, there is some similarity in cookie cutter approach. I feel that's more efficient in that sort of business model to integrate scale and cookie cutter approach. But when it comes to developments, all of our developments are very different. But on site, we have a standardized spec. So for an example, if we're delivering 20 flats in Tame, they'll all be similar kitchens, similar colors, similar tiles, similar carpet fittings, similar front doors, similar door handles. Everything will be the same on one site. But then if you use another site, for an example, it'll be almost very, very different. Sometimes same kitchen supplier, but it might be a different kitchen. To give you an example of why that is, we have a flat in North London on our Muswell Hill scheme, which is going to be worth 1.1 million as a guide price. In Tame, we've got 1-bedroom flats that are worth 250 grand. Now, to fit the same kitchen and the same tiles in both of those sites doesn't really cut the mustard of what the buyer wants and what the buyer is going to be committed to be buying. So for those reasons, we have a very different spec type for each site. And that is a process we go through. Some sites we have interior designers, some sites we don't. And I would highly recommend that if you are going to exit to sell, that you do think about those considerations. Another thing that you can do, Alfie, is actually look at other people's developments locally before you've even got to the point of second fix and design to see what they're fitting, see what appliances they're fitting in their kitchen, see what colors they're going with. And that's really important. Another really top tip that we did on our site in Tame, we didn't know whether to go with, so Tame is a countryside place in Oxfordshire, a lovely market town. And we didn't know what color and branding to go with the site, which would then bleed through the value or the design of the site. So we actually did a poll in the city centre with a big whiteboard and asked people what color scheme that they preferred, what branding they preferred, what design they preferred. And that gave us a really good idea of what potential buyers in that area would like to see. Also ask your suppliers. Say to your supplier, what's in at the moment, what are people liking, what, I don't know. If a kitchen company is selling 150 kitchens a month and you're going in to pick a kitchen for your future buyer, just ask what's selling. That's a really top tip, because what is selling is what they're selling, and that makes your life a little bit easier. Cool. Question from Wholesome Nutrition. I believe at times you retain some apartments on your developments schemes as HMOs. Could you go through the planning process when part of the initial PD conversion, as well as legal considerations as far as utilizing leasehold properties as HMOs. So, and then last question, which is kind of tied into the same thing. Are there any PD rights that permit HMOs as part of the conversion? So essentially, no, there's no PD rights that you're warranting yourself once you're doing a fully fledged new build scheme. It's probably a new application that you're looking for to get a proper licensed 5-bedroom HMO plus in a development, but in the locations that we deal with, anything with 4 beds or below is an unlicensed HMO. Therefore, you don't necessarily need to be too concerned about from a planning prospect. So we tend to only do sort of 2 or 3 bedroom flats, which works really well. And obviously, we're not in a position where we need to be too concerned about the planning. From legal consideration, no difference. It's more compliance. All of our HMOs that we deliver are same compliance as all of them to make sure that we're future-proofing them. I hope that answers your question. Ben and I actually answered this a few weeks ago, and he probably gave a slightly better answer to that than I did. But anyway, hopefully that's answered it. James Allen, thanks very much. Hope you're good. Hope you're having a good Friday and all weekend. On to the next question, Gareth Bodwin. What's your actual system for sourcing commercial to resi or HMO deals? Do you go through every listing platform like Rightmove, Zoopla, Savills, etc.? Follow-on question, or is it more about making sure every agent knows what you're after? Any advice for giving me for me finding these deals? I don't want to deflect, Gareth, but if you go and watch Series 3, Episode 10, I did a deep dive on acquisitions where I solely talked about acquisitions and how we buy stuff. So since we've set up the businesses almost 10 years ago, we've bought a property or a project every 4 weeks. And that has all come off the back of just being really active in the acquisition space and making sure that we've always got enough pipeline to be moving on to. In that video, I talk about acquisitions, where we look, how we look. But to come back to you on your exact question, I believe it's good to build relationships with estate agents and let them know so that they know exactly what you're looking for. That's really important. We buy a lot of stuff on market. We wanted to grow a team and a business which comes at a cost, which is really difficult to do if you're doing direct to vendor lead generation and conversion, because I will bet anyone that's watching this video ever, if you went from a cold start to starting out in property and you started with direct to vendor, I don't think you're getting paid from any projects within at least 2 years. And then if you deliver the projects, that's if you trade it out, you're probably then looking at least another year. So that's a 3-year spell where you're not getting paid or bringing in revenue or significant revenue. So with that intake, we like on-market deals. We've made on-market deals work, and we're only buying on-market deals every 4 weeks. But it's all down to the process of acquisitions. The most important thing is to value your own time and create a process that discounts as many deals as quickly as possible. It's not about finding the deal that works. It's discounting the deals that don't work as quick as you can, so you're not wasting your time on them. I hope that answers your question. Go and watch that acquisitions video. Again, that's Series 3, Episode 10. Gareth, if you've got any other questions, DM me, and hopefully I will be able to help. But good question. XCIR. Have you developed a kind of standardized spec for your HMOs? Fire, safety, gas, electric? Yes, 100%. Those stuff, you can't make them sexy. They are what they are. All of this first fix and integration and compliance is really important to get dialed down, and you can actually build efficiencies within your business model if you have the same fire engineer, the same gas engineer, same electrician, and the same contractor all working on the same site. At the moment, we are in XP, we're delivering a cluster of 5 HMOs, and the same contractor, same electrician, same gas engineer, and same fire safety engineer are delivering 2 other HMOs locally, 1 7-bed and 1 5-bed. The autonomy that you get when you have the same team on these projects is really, really good. And they build their own fire plan and they communicate with each other. And the first fix fire strategy electrician is dealing with the other electricians that they're working on emergency lighting and this, that, and the other. So we build plans for all of them. We definitely have a process. We try and keep the same teams involved if they're good. And I would highly recommend you standardize spec and process on all of your sites. Obviously, there's nuances, but most of our stuff is 5 to 6 bed HMOs, so it's very standardized. And I hope that does help. Tons of HMO questions coming in today. I don't hate it because Ben isn't as ingrained in the HMO stuff as I am, which is good. Question from Property Deals Daily. Do you have a rough cost per room when converting a house to a HMO? We'd love to understand what the key cost drivers tend to be. Cool. So brilliant question. Everyone that I mentor, I always say, get your cost per bed dialed down and know that figure, because if you know that figure, it makes analyzing deals so quick. So we have a social housing HMO portfolio, which is more semi-self-contained studios in Croydon. And then we have our private HMO portfolio in Oxfordshire. We tend to spend about £20,000 per bed per HMO, obviously, plus abnormals. The reason I say plus abnormals is if we bought, for an example, a terraced house that didn't need extending and we could get 5 bedrooms out of it, would probably spend about 100 grand. So that's 20k per bed times 5. If we then need to do a 6-meter single story rear extension and a loft conversion, you need to add those on top if you're still achieving the same 5 bedrooms. The typical costs, it's sort of spread across the kitchen and the amenity across the unit. The typical costs are, the infrastructure for those bedrooms, such as the en-suites, lockable bedrooms, back to brick renovation, the radiators, etc. So we drive that down to about £20,000 per bed. Our cost in Croydon, slightly bigger. Our average unit size is close to 20 meters squared with their own tea making and heating facilities for cooking in their bedrooms. Therefore, that is a little bit higher. So we tend to average out about 30k per bed per unit down in Croydon, plus abnormals. I hope that is useful. To give you a bit of context, Ryan, my friend who's developing up in Darlington, has a similar cost per bed to me, but he has his construction in-house. And I know that, for example, Stuart, who's also on the Groundup podcast, probably spends about 25k a bed. So around that figure, I'd say that if you're going for really high end, 30k a bed is safe. If you're going for standard HMOs and you're pretty efficient at driving those costs and efficiencies down, maybe 20k a bed will get you over the line, but somewhere in between. A really good question. Moving on to for HMOs, Jamie Tuck. How do you approach the valuation? Is it based on yield value valuation, or do you just expect bricks and mortar and keep the strategy flexible? If it is yield, do you try to speak to a value before? Always speak to a value before anyway. I mean, that's a given. I actually, when we get the valuation quotes from the lender, I will ask the lender to ask all 3 valuers how they're going to go about the commercial valuation, because that's really important for me. I don't want to waste £2 grand to get a valuer out and then find out that they don't even understand how they're going to value the site. So that's a really important one. Now back to the valuation. So me and Ryan were having a huge conversation about this the other day. So we operate in Oxfordshire. Oxfordshire is a high capital value area. So your yield valuation can sometimes be less or the same as your bricks and mortar valuation for specifically 6 beds and below. If you've got 7 beds and above, that commercial valuation may come in higher than your bricks and mortar. So you may opt for a commercial valuation. We've got 7 beds going through at the moment, and we're opting for a commercial valuation. One thing I will caveat this with is I'm not a massive fan of portfolios that are all commercial valuations, because you're begging for going into a position of negative equity. What is that? It's the problem that happened in 2008 when a lot of people lost their homes. This is how it happens. If you go to a location that doesn't have many HMOs and you start there and there's huge demand because there's no HMOs there, you're the first mover there, the room rates are great, you might be getting 800 a room, for an example, but the property you've only bought for 150k. So these are typically situations in lower capital value areas. You've now renovated it and valued that building up at 300, 400 grand, and the building is still worth only 250 as a bricks and mortar or a family home. You're technically in negative equity from day one as a family home, but it's okay because you've got a rented HMO that's producing cash flow and a lender has come in and lent you the capital on it. Now let's roll forward 5 years or 8 years, and everyone else is piling into this area because they've seen you're getting £800 a bed room rates and they really think that that place works. And now you've got huge competition, which by the way, supply and demand means costing goes down, so your room rates deflate. And then your room rates that were originally valued higher than bricks and mortar have devalued against the asset. So you're now in a position where you've got high mortgage from when there was high supply and low supply, high demand, and high rent, to a high supply, low demand valuation, and you may get yourself into negative equity. So that is why we like to do 75-80% of our portfolio as bricks and mortar valuations, and why we would avoid completely going into a valuation model. Now, I'll caveat that with, our social housing portfolio is a yield-based valuation, and the whole portfolio is a valuation because they're 10-year full repairing leases. So by the time that product comes to an end, I'm not that concerned. But if it was a privately rented HMO space, I would be a little bit more concerned. So Jamie, to answer your question, valuations, we do both commercial and we do bricks and mortar. I would definitely speak to the valuer regardless, give them a valuation pack, show them the numbers, show them why you think it's a good deal and what supports that. But I would also be cautious of spreading some weight across the board in your portfolio, probably more relevant in low capital value areas like up north. But where we are, we've got a 6-bed HMO that we bought for 500, spent 100 on it and revalued at 800 on a bricks and mortar valuation. That probably values at around 550, 600 commercial valuation. So our bricks and mortar are really strong where we are, and that's why we like that sort of space. But really good question. Cool. Next question. On to Sash Windows Cambridge Company. I think you've been following us quite a bit. Thank you very much for following us and being a routine listener and question person. Just quick reminder for anyone, keep the questions coming, loving them. So say a HMO gross is 4.5 grand gross, and then net's about 1.5. What does that really look like after tax and reserves for future maintenance? Do you use capital allowances or reliefs to keep most of the real profit? We're not massive fans of capital capital allowances. We don't really do that a lot, and maybe we're missing a trick with our accountant, or maybe not. I don't know. The way that we really create value is essentially we create capital value in the asset. So we spend money on it and it goes up in value when we recoup that cash that's come back out. We obviously have a management company which charges a fee. That's one way to potentially offset some of your gross to net, and how you can then offset that in a different business, which might be a saleable business. But also what we do is we just buy more HMOs. So we've got more overheads so that our net isn't net profit, is actually going into the next asset. Then comes the problem when you stop growing, you're obviously producing net income across the board, and you might pay potentially high tax in that. I'm not a tax advisor, but we typically make about the similar to you, sort of 1,500 to 2.5 net per property. And we just roll that into new projects. And that is how we typically offset corporation tax, so to speak. We also flip houses, which might incur some more corporation tax, but we're trying to reinvest in capital and grow the portfolio by reinvesting. So I suppose that's really a question if you've built up and you're at a point where actually you are accruing tax because you've got a net income. Another way that you potentially do it is charge your own capital that's going into these deals. So you might have an investment in the business which accrues an interest, which then deflects it into another company. I mean, fundamentally, there's no way to deflect tax. It is what it is. We have a group structure, so we can sometimes offset that legally and in a good way into other businesses. Kind of feel like that's maybe answered it. Hopefully it has. And thank you for the question, Sash Window Cambridge Company. Growth acquisitions, great name. If you were starting again and want to scale quickly with HMOs and commercial conversions, what would your playbook look like? How long have you got? Look, I love HMOs. I love commercial conversions, and I even more love when you merge them together and you have a bit of both on one site. It's like cash flow versus development, and hubba. I would actually recommend doing what we're doing at the moment. Really look at sites that are sort of between 500 and 3 million GDV. Focus on retaining most of the site, maybe selling part to recoup capital if you've got investors involved. Focus on high cash flow HMOs, keep the build costs as lean as you can, recoup as much capital as you can, go on bricks and mortar valuations and roll into the next project. I think you can very quickly get up to, maybe 100, 200 bed portfolio. The problem with development is you've always got to be developing. Everyone in your team is always going to be there and cost you money every year. So mine and Ben's goal is to get our rent roll up to about 100% of our costs of our development business. So every development that we do is kind of a choice rather than having to feed that machine. So my playbook would be to get to a cash flow positive position with a blended strategy between HMOs and conversions until you get to a point where you've got your overheads covered and you don't need to develop anything. And then once that's the situation, I would go out and develop fund sites. And developing those sites would be, projects that you bring in investment capital anyway. So it's not a sap on your previous net income, which is sustaining your life. As far as like playbook, I would do 4, 5, 6 beds. I'll then do cluster flats. I'd do, the odd sui generous one. I'd do anything that works. For us, it's about metrics. The metrics that we monitor in HMOs is we want to hit a minimum of 20% return on cash left in. And we want to make sure that we can then lock it in for a 5-year and pay down the mortgage completely, pay down the investment completely. We also want to hit a minimum of 10% return on equity, which is a really important figure. And we also like cookie cutter. We like it in the same areas so we get economies of scale and can grow that efficiently. Good question. Advanced agency, what room size do you usually go for in HMOs, especially interested in the difference between en-suites and non-en-suites? So given the recent regulations that were trying to get pushed into the government where we would get taxed banded per unit. So they were trying to bring in en-suites as a unit and then council tax would be charged for each unit. Since that's been abolished, we're putting en-suites as in many rooms as we can. Our typical room size is between 8 and 14 meters squared plus the en-suite. We sometimes do have smaller rooms, which are just a room and a shared bathroom. That's also fine. But that's our typical room size for our private stuff. We normally have a large kitchen, living, open dining space. So that is compensated for the living accommodation and also a utility space that's designated. So there's plenty of space from a social aspect, but the rooms are quite, the room I'm currently in, obviously I'm not in a HMO at home, is about 8 meters squared. You can easily get a wardrobe, a chest of drawers and a bed with an ottoman and storage and cupboards as well. So that's about the size that we look for. Where possible with home working and hybrid working, we try and fit a desk in the room as well, so it caters for the tenant. In our social housing portfolio in South London, as I mentioned, it's about 18 to 20 meters squared per unit, but they are self-contained studios. The people do live in those rooms. I think HMOs, people don't live always in their rooms. They like to spend time in the communal space as well. Very good. Gareth Bodwin, do you have a go-to strategy that balances risk reward, like securing sites, delay completion, then going through planning or PD before drawdown? Examples would be super helpful. Cool. So if I'm delivering HMOs, I don't need planning consent to convert to HMOs. So I'm specifically going to answer this, Gareth, for a development business. Now, our development business can cater for probably anywhere between 20 to 40 million in delivery at any given time. What that 20 to 40 million looks like from an acquisitions perspective to balance risk and reward is a blend. We do permitted development where we typically have the ticket of PD before we exchange, so fairly low risk and quite quick. We might see the site, get it in legals, get the PD, get it bought 3 months later, and then we're on site within a few months. That's a very quick transactional process, which we're open to and we do. We then also like schemes where we might actually have a little bit more of a long run up and we're buying something conditional to planning. I don't really care when we're buying a site, as long as we're buying it, we're not wasting our time on anything. So if it comes in 2 years, I'm happy agreeing a subject to planning deal to get that in 2 years. So for an example, at the moment, we're delivering Marlow and Longhambra as an example. Longhambra was just an unconditional purchase. We got PD before exchange. We bought the site within 3 months and we were in and out within probably 15 months. Marlow, we agreed that deal 3 years ago. We took it through listed building consent and full planning consent, and it took 3 years to get to the point, 2 years to the point of purchase, 3 years to the point of exit, and that project then fell into our pipeline. So to answer your question, Gareth, you kind of want to look at your pipeline as just doing profitable deals. The deals that you negotiate are all profitable deals in the sense that how you've negotiated them, but you want a blend of all of them above. We've also secured sites that we've traded on and not developed. So we've always got this sort of, I would say, blend of various different projects that we're moving on to or potentially exiting. And that really helps cash flow, risk, pipeline building. The nature is they all turn up at the same time. You get 5 sites in legals for 3 years, and then all of a sudden you need to buy them all, and that's just the way it goes. The phrase is like buses. But if you try and then facilitate some subject to planning, some on con with PD, it's then building your pipeline in a slightly more controlled manner, because you can see it coming ahead of you and you go, well, if we get that planning, that's going to fall in October and we need more sites before then, so let's buy some more stuff uncon. Hopefully that answers your question. I would love to give you more examples, but I haven't got time. F, hey, I'm new to property and I'm trying to approach an angel investor to fund my first deal. How would you split the profit? Get them to invest with no track record? First off, I wouldn't use the word get. Is you don't want to get them to invest. You want them to come partner with you. You want them to work with you. That's a really key thing. Like when I in my early days, I invested in a crowdfunded project myself, and I met the developer. And he used this is just the importance of language with investors. He came up to me and said, "Thanks very much for coming on board." And it made me feel so welcome. And it didn't make me feel like I was getting on board a BA flight, but it was a lot better than him coming up and saying, "I'm glad I got you to invest," so to speak. So an investment is a partnership. You might not have a track record, but you might have expertise in certain areas that might de-risk the project or have found value in the project. So present those. I had a guy the other day who's a site manager who has been for like 20 years. And he said, "I haven't got a track record." And I was like, you're actually kidding me. You've been working on sites for 20 years. Put that all on paper and share that with investors. And be honest, be candid. If you don't have the experience, you can share that. So I'd pull together a track record of what you do have, your skill sets that you can bring to the table. Look at the areas of what is required from a professional team to deliver a site. And if there's gaps in that, bring people in. Maybe bring in someone like a mentor. We might bring in a mentor on a scheme, or alternatively, you might actually bring in, an architect that's really well experienced, a planning consultant that's experienced, a project manager like Tom. Bring in the people that fill in the gaps in those teams. So when that question is asked by your investor, you've already boxed it off. Make sure you've analyzed it really well, analyze the risk, analyze the setbacks, analyze the exit, analyze the entrance. Think of all these things, and that is definitely a logical way to go about your scheme. And then you say, "I have no equity myself, so what sort of things would you include in the deal package, pitch deck, or business plan to attract?" So have a bit about yourself, have a track record. That's a useful document to have in the background and to have for future. As far as the deal goes, what we typically do is we share the highlights of the deal. So a summary, so PD conversion to 5 units, rough purchase price, delivery costs, exit values, and then amount of investment that we require. Once that's dialed down, we then get a face-to-face meeting with them and booked in, and we go through them with everything toe to toe, so they understand everything top to toe on the project, and can really get to grips with essentially the whole scheme, all encompassing. So that's really important. Hopefully that's helpful. And if you would like to see our pitch deck, DM us and we will send that to you. I'm going to have to shoot in 5 minutes because the weekend is calling. But a couple of more questions from Wholesome Nutrition. Have 2 buy-to-lets, 30k gross rent and 100k in cash. All my offers are so far off guide, finding it hard to get the next project. Offers I'm putting out are so far off guide, I'm struggling to get the next project. Well, I think you've said a similar thing a few times. Essentially, take this away with you and do what you will with it. A mentor once told me that you never turn up at your desk in your office and there'll be a box with a ribbon around it saying deal. You have to create the deal, and you have to be the person that kind of like, I don't want to use the word manipulate, but control the deal to bring your competitive advantage, bring your skill sets to create value in that deal and create it. And that might be many of things that you can do. Some deals we've won very just by the skin of our teeth on a process or a line or a deck that we've used and how we've bid, or an overage condition. But the most important thing is to understand the seller's requirements, understand the agent's requirements to get that deal sold, and work with them and give them what they want, but negotiate something that you want. So as an example, Wholesome Nutrition, if you're not getting anywhere near guide price, I'll challenge you with something. Pay guide price, but put a condition on it. So say, for example, you want to buy a building that's got planning scope. Say, I'll pay you guide price, but I need 12 months to get planning. That may actually work out a more profitable deal for you in that instance. So don't be afraid to pay more for a site. Just think about what conditions you can add to it to benefit you, so that that guide price is negated in value. Because if you haven't got to carry that site for 12 months in finance costs while you're doing that process, you may end up with more profit. So take that away. That's an example of creativity. I could think of 1,000 things that you could create on a deal, and go away and think creatively. Look at all of those deals that you've bid on and think, what could I change in this to make this more creative? Ask the sellers, what do they need, want, or indifferent, and then push forward with that, if that makes sense. Cool. We are at a close, 1 hour and 10 minutes. Loved it. Still got really good engagement. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone, for staying to the end. I think this is one of our best engagements to the end. Yeah, let us know. Please give us some feedback if you've enjoyed the live Q&A. It's been new. We've obviously always been doing Q&A for all of our presentations, but it's normally topical. So thank you for going easy on me. Next time I definitely want some challenging questions, and maybe Ben will join in on it, and maybe we might get our special guest Tom's tips coming back. We've got Jack's hacks, Tom's tips, and Ben's Wren's kitchens. That's the best joke I could come up with that. But anyway, I'm going to love you all and leave you all. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the sun, and we will see you all next week.